Welcome to the Good Word presented by Custom LDS Scriptures and eBorn Books. And now, here's your host, Nick Galletti.
Hello and welcome to the Good Word. This episode's guest is Anthony Larson. Anthony Larson has been a freelance journalist for over 12 years, having been published in several newspapers, magazines, and websites. Anthony has also been a successful video producer and is an award-winning composer. Now semi-retired, Anthony continues to write, with 5 books written for the LDS community. Much of Anthony's writings can be found on his website, MormonProphecy.com. Welcome, Anthony, to the Good Word.
Thanks, Nick.
The term LDS writer is a very broad umbrella that incorporates many different genres and styles. How would you describe your writing and the genre you would place yourself under?
That's a good question. Probably historian primarily, as it applies to ancient tradition and the study of cosmology, which involves much more than just astronomy, but it does include astronomy. And I've written books, a couple that are out of print. One is called Parallel Histories, where I equate Nephite and American history, show the similarities between the two histories from beginning to end, really, and then identify certain events within it that are remarkably similar. So it was called Parallel Histories, the Nephites and the Americans. And I also did an analysis of John's Book of Revelation using the imagery that was common in their day, in John's day, so you could understand the vernacular, the imagery that was common in all those ancient cultures. So part historian, part
Would you call it theologian?
Keeper of odd knowledge. No,
Okay.
I'm not a theologian.
Okay. Well, you've written for newspapers and magazines as well as full published titles. Which do you enjoy doing more?
I think I enjoy writing the books because of my research, because it is so unique. I enjoy all of it. I've written everything from advertising copy to hard news, dog bites man sort of stuff. But it's the most rewarding part is researching. I'll tell you, for me personally, it's absolutely amazing and testimony building to go back and discover that some off the cuff or oblique reference by the prophet Joseph Smith that obviously no one around him took much heed of. That's bad language there. But anyway, nobody paid much attention, and to discover that he was talking about very important principles. A good part of what Joseph Smith left behind and the others that knew him and reported what he had said, although it's anecdotal, it's still very valuable. And you discover that Joseph Smith talked about things that only now we're beginning to understand in relationship to ancient events and ancient history. And so that I find extremely rewarding and testimony building. So that's why I enjoy it.
Excellent. The main thrust of your writings, at least for your published works, has been on prophecies relating to the second coming, the last days. You have a variety of different titles that we'll get into later, but you're actually a very prolific writer on this subject. In fact, I don't really know anybody else that has probably written as much on the subject of prophecies and relating to the second coming and things like that. What about this subject has just captured your attention?
I don't know, Nick. I'll tell you, it's an obsession that drives everyone around me crazy. I can remember sitting in a primary class. I even wrote a piece about this. I used to go to the old First Ward here in Salt Lake that was on, I think it was 8th East between 7th and 8th South. The building's no longer there. They built the original Park Stake Center, one of the very first, if it wasn't the first in the church, right next door. And I attended Hamilton School, which is on the corner. It's no longer there. So that tells you how old I am. But I used to, primary was on Tuesdays. And when we get out of school, the first kid over to the chapel got to ring this great big brass bell. And all that would remind all the kids it was time for primary. So we'd go over there for primary. I can remember sitting in a class, and this is where it all started. A teacher said, well, there were men in antiquity that we called prophets, and they saw a vision of the future, and they saw what was going to happen in the future. Boy, they had me. I went home and tried to read Revelation, and at primary age, I don't know how old I was at the time, 6th grade, maybe 5th grade. That's where it all started.
Wow.
So, and it's an obsession. There's no question about it.
Well, some are challenged, even skeptical, of writings on the subject of the last days and revelations, prophecies, etc., especially when those writings come from someone who's not an apostle or a prophet in the church. When you first started with this topic, did you have any apprehensions to taking this subject on?
No, fools rush in where angels fear to tread, or general authorities, as the case may be. In my naivete, I thought every Latter-day Saint would absolutely be impressed as I was with this information. It all starts, well, from the concept that the history of the earth that you've been taught all your life is a red herring. You have to go to the prophets and get their version of the story. Nibley talked about this, that anybody can slice away the side of a hill, look at the layers of sediment there, and guess about how long it took to get there and how it got there. Of course, he's poking fun at geology, which is one of the primary disciplines in science. He said what they fail to do is consult the records, because mankind saw all this happen and they reported it. But science threw the records out because they considered them to be untrustworthy. They were myths, legends, fables. And Nibley was right. That's exactly what happened. But in so doing, they threw the baby out with the bathwater. So what our version of Earth's history is just as misguided as the one that existed in the Middle Ages that said the Earth was flat, and if you sailed too far, you'd sail over the edge. It's funny, and I talk about this. I have an online set of classes that I give, 16 hours of instruction in ancient cosmology and its relationship to the scriptures. And I talk about this, those, what are they called? CSI programs,
Yes.
crime scene investigation programs that were all the rage. I guess they're still pretty popular. The investigators go out. No self-respecting investigator would go out and examine a crime scene and collect evidence without also interrogating the eyewitnesses. But science decided that the eyewitnesses were untrustworthy, and so they refused to consider their testimony. And they just collected what they considered to be evidence. And that's given us a perverse view of ancient history.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break to do our contest here on the Good Word. Our sponsor, Custom LDS Scriptures, is giving away one of their amazing, unique scripture sets, the First Edition Quad. Inspired by the first edition printing of the Book of Mormon in 1830 by E.B. Grandin Press, the First Edition Quad includes a modern-day set of the standard works using the vintage styling of the first edition. The First Edition Quad is set apart by a distinctive hand-painted spine and embossing elements, as well as the top-quality leather that is stained, wax-coated, and covered with a high-gloss finish for years of use and enjoyment. Book names have been designed to emulate the original lettering and hand antiquing elements to give an authentic look. Each book is bound by hand using the modern-day standard works. To enter to win a copy of the first edition quad, all you have to do is sign into Facebook, find the Custom LDS Scriptures page, then find the photo in the photo gallery announcing this contest. Share that picture on your Facebook wall with the answer to a trivia question in your posting of this photo. Each episode in the month of February 2013 will have a different question. You can post the picture one time for each episode, and each time you answer the question right, you get entered to win. 8 episodes with 8 chances to win. Here is this episode's question. In what city did E.B. Grandin print the first edition of the Book of Mormon? No purchase necessary, and you don't need to have all 8 answers correct to enter. 1 answer per entry and 1 share allowed per person. Good luck, and remember to find the Custom LDS Scriptures page on Facebook. Find the contest picture for the first edition quad and share that picture on your wall with the answer to the question in your post. Good luck, and thank you from our friends at Custom LDS Scriptures. Now, Anthony, your research is founded primarily on Velikovsky's ideas on the universe. For those that don't know what that is, please explain what the theory is and how it applies to your writings.
Well, Velikovsky was a Russian Jew back in the late 40s, educated in a number of prestigious European institutions. His father was a rabbi. Emmanuel was his first name. He rejected Judaism. He was what we call a traditional Jew, not a practicing Jew. His father was a Zionist, and so he was well versed in those things, even though he didn't practice the religion. He came across an interesting concept when he studied under Wilhelm Steckel, Freud's apprentice, I guess would be the right word. Velikovsky was a doctor, an MD, and he moved over to establish practice in psychology. He was one of, with Heinrich Loh, was one of the people that wrote the course material for the Hebrew University in I was going to say Jerusalem, it was Tel Aviv. And all of this, of course, before the Second World War broke out. He happened across the concept in that research because Freud had said that the Jewish tradition and the Old Testament and all the rest came out of a peculiarly Jewish bent psychological profile, and that's where it all came from. Velikovsky, on the other hand, said, no, there's real history behind it. So he began working on his thesis to build the history. And in the process, he came across the novel idea that Earth had been menaced by other planetary bodies within the memory recorded history of mankind. That premise led him to investigate the Exodus, and he saw the miracles of the Exodus as natural events, all tracing their origin back to this near collision or close passage of 2 planets. So that's where the whole thing began. I stumbled across Velikovsky 2 or 3 times and dismissed the concept because it sounded so out there. Then in, I think it was 75, Reader's Digest published a condensed version of his book, Worlds in Collision, in one of their editions, and I happened to read that. And I was so impressed by the concept that I couldn't leave it alone. Ended up reading both his Worlds in Collision and Earth in Upheaval. Eventually read all of his books. He had to reconstruct ancient history because the mainstream view had used the Egyptian king lists, and that had created a distortion in ancient history because they had regrouped all of that. They'd repeated some of the dynasties and several of the kings or pharaohs under different names. And so that led to a whole different view of ancient history. And the thing that really got me was I was looking for corroboration in the documents and the tradition, the doctrine, and the teachings of Joseph Smith um, and the church. And I was having very little success until I stumbled across a little uh, speech that he gave on the grounds of the Nauvoo Temple. And in that speech, he talks about the last great sign being called by modern scientists a planet or a comet. And I was stunned because up until that time, I'd thought of Velikovsky's theories as only being about history. But Velikovsky used precisely the same two words that Joseph Smith had used in describing the agent of the Exodus. It was a planet-sized body that looked to observers like a comet. It was the pillar of fire and smoke of the Exodus. And here's Joseph Smith talking about the sign of the second coming, and he talks about the same natural disasters that Velikovsky elaborates and comments on in the Exodus account written by Moses. And all of a sudden, there was this epiphany. For me, I realized Velikovsky wasn't just about history, he was about the signs of these kind of planetary events, and that was precisely what Joseph Smith was saying was going to be the cause of the events in the last days. I said to myself, I got to write about this.
Well, let's talk about your trilogy series.
Okay.
Give us the titles of each of the books and maybe what they cover.
Well, they're long. The first one is "And the Moon Shall Turn to Blood." It came from, of course, the symbolic or metaphoric language of the prophets. The second is "The earth shall reel to and fro." The third is "And there shall be a new heaven and a new earth." All of those are metaphors based on cosmological events. The thing that the disservice that science did is in throwing out the ancient records, including the scriptures, as anything valid or reliable, is that they removed that concept that all ancient cultures knew, and that is that the earth had been menaced by what they called gods in their tradition, but the gods turn out originally to be planets. In fact, what most Latter-day Saints don't know is that Joseph left an illustration of what the heavens used to look like. Peter said, we got a new heaven and a new earth, and that's where I take the title for the third book. We got a new heaven and a new earth after the flood, because the old heaven and the old earth were destroyed in the flood. I'm, of course, paraphrasing what he said. And we take that to be kind of poetic imagery. Well, it's imagery, but it's based in very real, concrete things. And Joseph drew a picture for Philo Dibble, and Philo Dibble published it. And when he got to the Salt Lake Valley with the saints, he traveled from ward to ward, from congregation to congregation, um, uh, displaying these relics of the restoration, because he'd been Joseph Smith's personal bodyguard. He was one of several. And Joseph, he had one of Joseph's seer stones that Joseph had given him. He had the amulet that Joseph was wearing when he was martyred. He produced this illustration of what the heavens looked like and said, Joseph drew this for me when he explained. Our tradition, thanks to Joseph Smith, corroborates Velikovsky. And the researchers such as Dave Talbot and others that have done additional work since then. And it opens up a whole new vista. And here's the clincher, Nick. Not only does it allow us to understand the symbolic language of the prophets so that we can read their visions and understand what they're talking about, it explains revelations such as John's book at the end of the New Testament. It explains the symbolism and metaphor that we come across in uh, Doctrine and Covenants and the Pearl of Great Price. But the real payoff is it explains our temple rituals to a T. And none of us, it's an ascension ritual, just like those practiced by all ancient cultures in their temples. Uh, and it's all based on this cosmological history of the earth when the heavens were vastly different than the heavens that we see now. And that's the key. You get that perspective and it changes everything.
And is this some of the stuff that you go into in, of course, more detail on your online lectures that you have, this
Yeah.
16 course
Yeah.
series that you
Yeah,
talk about?
I tell people in 16 hours instruction, when you finish, you'll be able to pick up any Old Testament book and read the visions or the I want to call them lectures, the speeches of the prophets, and you'll be able to understand the symbolism. You'll be able to read it just like you do a newspaper or a magazine, because you will have mastered, at least begun to master, the symbolic language that was used. It's a vernacular. It's uh, a particular set of images that they used to convey, just like the apostles and the Savior when he was using parables. They said, well, what do you teach in parables for? Why don't you just say it straight out? And he says, well, for some it's given to understand and others it isn't. He's not saying that people get special dispensation to understand and others don't. He's saying some people make the effort to learn what it means and others just don't give it much credence. That's how the prophets taught. And they all use the same symbolic set of references. So the titles of the book, "And the Moon Shall Turn to Blood," or "The Earth Shall Reel to and Fro," you can read about that in the that phraseology in the Old Testament. You can read about it in the Pearl of Great Price. You can read about it in Doctrine and Covenants. Joseph Smith understood this imagery because he used it comfortably and he used it as he should, which is something that I've not been able to find in any other modern scholar. They just don't understand where this imagery comes from, and that's the key.
Well, to the individual that says, I don't care about this stuff, or it doesn't matter, as long as I live a good life, the Lord will protect me, and all this. Um, Even those that think that, these planet symbols and things like that, they don't have a lot of weight in their interest.
Right.
How do you respond to those that doubt or have dispassion for this subject?
I understand it because that's where I was once. Um, and it's not a problem or a flaw unless you refuse to acknowledge it when you're presented with it. If you really want to understand what the Savior was talking about, what John was talking about, what Ezekiel, wheels within wheels, what Daniel's talking about, stones cut out of mountains without hands, image with a head of gold. What does all of that have to do? Lehi and Nephi, uh, a tree, a river, a road, a rod of iron. Uh, and what about the beasts of prophecy? The same four beasts show up in John's Revelation that you see in Ezekiel, you see it in Daniel, and you see it in Joseph Smith's explanation of the facsimiles. All this is meant to convey a message, just like the rituals in our temple are meant to convey a message. And when you understand where that comes from, instead of trying to stay awake in a temple session, in an endowment session, it becomes a living, exciting teaching moment. And every time you go back, you begin to understand more of what you do, what you see, what you say, what you're instructed to do in the temple. Everybody can understand the covenants. That's easy. We could go in and take the covenants and leave in 15 minutes. But what's all the dressing and all the rituals and all the rest? What does that mean? Why is there a statue to a pagan goddess? What's it doing in the celestial room over the veil? Why are these things? And they never ask these questions. And knowing this strengthens your testimony, confirms the fact that the church was restored, that this is indeed the restored gospel. Just as Joseph Smith said, our temple, as it turns out, is the best proof we've got that this is the true church. And yet we keep it a secret because we're worried that we're going to get persecuted for it. Knowing this is like getting a second testimony. It's absolutely amazing. And yes, in my opinion, at some time in your mortal and upcoming immortal life, you are going to have to learn these principles because they are correct. You're going to have to understand it. So why not get an early start?
There you go. For more information on Anthony Larson and his works, visit MormonProphecy.com. Thank you, Anthony, for coming on to The Good Word.
My pleasure, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Good Word with host Nick Galletti. The Good Word is sponsored by Custom LDS Scriptures. Custom LDS Scriptures binds or rebinds LDS editions of the standard works in over 55 colors and in more than 3,000 styles. Find us on Facebook or on the web, customldsscriptures.com. And Eborn Books, with multiple locations in Utah along the Wasatch Front. Eborn Books is Utah's largest buyer and seller of new, used, rare, and out-of-print books, including tens of thousands of LDS titles. To find store locations or to view our inventory online, visit us at ebornbooks.com. The Good Word is a production of Radio Gold Productions. Visit our website at radiogoldproductions.com/The Good Word. Connect with the show and submit questions for upcoming guests on Twitter at Good Word Podcast. Thank you for listening to The Good Word.